This is an introduction to the presentation. A federal mining tax is crucial to any consideration of federal-state relations within our Australian constitutional system. The fact is, the Commonwealth, the federal government, is already flush with revenue. And we live in the most fiscally centralised federation within the OECD. That means that the federal government takes a bigger proportion of the total tax take than the American government, than the German government, the Canadian government, or the Swiss government. And it's clear, if a federal tax is introduced, it will only exacerbate that. This, of course, goes against the original intention of the Founding Fathers. Our federal Commonwealth will become even more unbalanced, and most importantly, the people have never approved such a deviation from the fundamental original intention of our Constitution, which was that governments should be principally responsible for the taxes they collect and the taxes they spend on behalf of their electors. In 2010, the Rudd government proposed to tax super profits from mining at a rate of 40%. Super profits would be any profits above the 10-year bond rate. That is to say, anything over a rather low 6%. The government was also to become liable for 40% of the losses, which suggested to many that this was in fact a partial nationalisation, one without compensation in breach of the Constitution. And the likelihood of the government actually paying 40% of any substantial losses, particularly to overseas miners, seemed rather minimal. Well, the miners said that with company tax, they'd be paying an effective tax rate of 55%, which would be one of the highest in the world and would drive away investment from Australia. Mr. Swan, the Treasurer, said they were lying. But an FOI application has shown that back in February 2010, the Treasury advised Mr. Swan that the effective rate on super profits would be 55%. That is to say, both the miners and the Treasury were in agreement that the effective tax rate on investments would be 55%. And of course the miners pointed out this would be among the highest in the world, probably the highest. Well, the super profits tax was crucial in the fall of the Rudd government, and Ms. Gillard and Mr. Swan created a new tax, the Mineral Rent Resources Tax, this time limited to iron ore and coal. There were rushed and secret negotiations, but only with the three biggest foreign miners, and this was done before the 2010 federal election. After the election, the government insisted that the agreement didn't cover any future increases in state royalties and that the miners would have to bear this. The miners and the Treasury said this wasn't so, and eventually the government agreed, but indicated it would lean on state governments not to increase royalties. How they could do that constitutionally was not clear. Under the new tax, the proposed new tax, the rate will be dropped from 40% to 22.5%, and because of a concession given to the foreign miners, whose assets will be assessed at market value, this will have an anomalous result in that Australian medium iron ore miners and other foreign miners are expected to pay an average rate of 48.9%, whereas the foreign miners, the big foreign miners, will only pay an average of 36.4%. The government also proposes to extend its offshore tax on petroleum, the MRRT, to petroleum and gas found within the territory of the states. However, the states could well counter that by saying that since the Australia Acts, they may legislate extraterritorially, and that the basis of the High Court ruling that offshore petroleum was a matter for the Commonwealth could perhaps now be challenged. When we look at the Constitution and the constitutional system, it is important to bear in mind what the new entity was, which was established for the very first time with the agreement of the people, the very first federation to be established by the specific agreement of the people. And it's important to look at the preamble to the Constitution Act. That preamble was part of the document which was approved in the referendums for federation, and that is described as one indissoluble federal commonwealth under the Crown and under the Constitution. That's what the new entity was, an indissoluble federal commonwealth under the Crown and under the Constitution. But we should also bear in mind what is the constitutional system. Bolingbroke in the 17th century in England described it very well, and I'll summarize this, as that assembly of laws, institutions and customs by which the people have agreed to be governed. And that allows us to bring into a consideration of the constitutional system the state constitutions, the imperial and Commonwealth of Nations documents such as the Statute of Westminster, the Australia Acts, and of course that golden thread which goes back through the English Bill of Rights, through the Glorious Revolution, back to the Magna Carta. That's part of those laws, institutions and customs by which we have agreed to be governed. Now it's clear that the Parliament, the federal Parliament and the state parliaments, all parliaments of limited powers, limited in their constitutions. And part of our constitutional system is an independent public service, as Bagehot insisted in his description of the Westminster system. We have an anomaly in relation to the development of this tax, and that was that instead of appointing a judge or eminent lawyer or accountant to head the tax review, the government appointed the Secretary of the Treasury, a public servant, to head the review. The problem then was, how could he give blunt, impartial advice when he in fact owned the review? You get a certain circularity there, and it was most unwise of the Rudd government to appoint their own head of Treasury to produce that review, because when they got the review, where would they go for blunt, impartial advice? They would go to their Secretary of the Treasury, who was the person who actually owned the review. And he came out in a most extraordinary way, in public, in defending the propositions in that review, not something which normally is the role of the head of Treasury. In the next part, I'll be coming to the mining tax, the proposed mining tax, and federalism. Thank you.